So now we're going to start the process of blending some materials. We're going to make a specific material for our nails, and we're also going to add a dirt material to help just further kind of integrate everything together. So let's get started with our nails. So we're going to take a pretty simple approach to this. So what I'm going to do here is just hit my space bar, and I'm going to create just a base material. So I'm going to use the base material node. Here I'll right click, drag and drop this here into my 3D view. Now, for the material preset, let's set this here to an iron. And what I can do is just start to increase my roughness value. Now, there's a built-in grunge amount control for this, and I'm probably just going to use this. So here I'll start to just increase my grunge amount. Here you can see that we start to have the grunge appearing here in our roughness. And we can also control this by just using our overall roughness amount as well. So here, let me just set this to maybe a value like this, I guess, here. So we're actually just going to use something really simple like this for our nails. So here we have that material. Now we have two materials. This is our wood, and then, like I said, we have our nails. So now we need to blend these two guys together, and we can do that using the material blending nodes. So here I'll hit the space bar again, and I'll start to type in material, if I can spell it right. Here we have material blend. So I'm going to use this one. And material blend just lets you blend two materials together. Now, the first thing that I do before making any connections is I come over here to the channels, and I want to disable all the channels that I'm not going to be working with. So for instance, we're not using diffuse or specular or glossiness. Here we have roughness, metallic. We do have ambient occlusion, so I want to enable this. And then our height here, we want to make sure this is set to true as well. Now, again, one more thing I want to check before I go into this material blending. So right now I'm in material blending mode, as indicated here in my graph by this icon. So we have standard material and compact material. So here I'm going to set this to 1, which is going to place me in just standard mode. And I want to take a look at my height map here. So let's go back to our base material, and let's take a look at the height map input. And then if we look at the height map output, you can see, well, there's a change here. And this is something I always forget to do. So if I come over here to my base material, you'll notice that there are some controls here for the height. So we have height, position, and range. So now I'm just going to take my range and just set this to 1. And what that does is it just gives me the exact range of the incoming height. So I just want to make sure that was set correctly before I start doing any material blending. All right, so now I'll hit 3 here on the keyboard. So now we're in full material mode. And for material 1, we're going to place this here. We're going to use our wood. And then material 2 is going to be our nails. And so now we're starting to blend these two materials together here. Now, what I want to do is now create some type of mask. It just so happens that we have a nails mask. So let's move all the way back here where we start to integrate our nails. And actually, if I look at this, I think it's going to go all the way back here to our basic shapes. So here, if I double click this nails output, this is our nails. So we're going to use this here. All right, so let's draw out a connection line here, hold down the Alt key, and then we'll just middle mouse and drag all the way over here to where we have our grayscale mask. And then I'll just set this here as the input. Okay, so now what we can do, I'll hit 1 on the keyboard so I can start to look at all of my channels. And if I double click the base output, we can now see the color. This is our new albedo, and you can see that now the nails are being blended appropriately. One thing I think I want to check with this, though, let's double click our grayscale mask, and you can see that this isn't really acting like an actual binary mask. So we have a gray value in here. So I think what I'd like to do is just run a levels on this. And again, just so I don't have to go searching for this node where I just manually reroute things. So hold down control, left click, drag this guy into here, and then replace the output. So now let's just come into here and take our input white and just drag this up like this until we encompass the entire nail. All right, so now let's go back to our base color. And here you can see that, well, we have our color value now. One other thing that I think I'd probably like to do with this, well, let's see. I'll tell you what I could do. Let me just change this a little bit. Okay, so I didn't want it to be so harsh. And then I'm going to come back into the base color. Now, I have this iron setting here, and I think what I'm probably going to do is maybe just tweak this a bit myself. So I'm going to set this to custom, and I want to make sure that my metallic value is set to 1. And then what I'm going to do is just manually set this base color. So I'm kind of cheating this a little bit. I'm making this a little bit darker. And you just have to be careful. If I end up making this base color too dark with 100% metallic value, then that's going to not be physically correct. Again, if this is something you're kind of new to, be sure to go to our website, algorithmic.com, in the Learn section, and you can check out our free PBR guide. But what I'm doing here is just kind of manually just tweaking this a bit. So I'm just going to make this a slightly darker value. So I want to get something probably like this. Again, I'm just kind of guessing here, but it'll be okay for what we want to do. All right, so now we'll hit 3 on the keyboard, and that's going to take care of our first material blend. So now let's come over to the result of this material blend, right-click, drag and drop that here into the 3D view, and now you can see that we have our nails. Now, they're real shiny and perfect at this time, so this is when I can come back and start to kind of play around with my roughness. But what I am going to do is just kind of play around more here with this grunge effect here. So let's see what we have. And again, just play around with my overall roughness. There we go. So now I'm starting to see some of that grunge here in these nails, and that's kind of knocking down some of that overall reflectivity. All right, so that's going to work pretty well for what we want to do so far. Okay, so the next phase is I want to add the dirt. And so we already have this material blend. I'm just going to reuse this technique again. So we have a base material and we have a material blend. So for this material blend, I'm going to select this node and just hit Control D. We'll just duplicate it here. And let's delete our nail base material, and let's also delete our nail mask. And here we want to make sure that for this material blend here, we actually just need to replace that. So now we're going to be blending the result of this material blend with a new material blend. And here I'm also going to create a base material. So we're going to use a base material again, and this time we're going to create a dirt out of this. So for my material preset, I set this to dielectric. And then here we'll just set kind of like a dirt value. Here we'll come into our color picker. This will be something that we actually, we'll go through and make changes to this a lot probably. And then for our roughness, I'm going to set this to a pretty high roughness value to start here. All right, so we're going to get something like this here. For this guy, let me just frame this up, and let me just say that this is the nails. So we have that, and this is going to be our dirt. Okay, so here on this material blend, since we duplicated it, we know all of our channels are already set up correctly. Here on this material blend, what I like to do, again, is just double check and make sure everything is working. So here's one thing that's happening here. Again, this is why I always like to check these channels. You can see here that, well, the nails is showing up in our height, and I definitely don't want this. This is going to cause some issues where we have this, this really dark circle here in our height. So here on this material blend, if we come over here to the height section, what I can do is just take the opacity and just drop that all the way to 0. So that's going to just remove the nails from affecting the height, which is what I want. Again, like I've said in previous videos, our height is just going to represent kind of the overall kind of silhouette of our large form shapes. Our ambient occlusion, this is okay, so everything's good. Metallic, you can see that the only metallic thing here is our nails. And let's see, roughness, this is working correctly. Everything else is good. All right, so we know that that blending is working for us. And now let's take our dirt and we'll add this here into the material too. So now comes the part where we need to add a grayscale mask for this. So what I'm going to do here, I'll hit the space bar and I'm going to do a search for dirt. And we have a dirt generator, which is really good for being able to place the dirt, but also have it, basically have it build up in all the cavity areas and so on. So I'm going to use this dirt generator here. Now, if we look at this dirt generator, you can see that it has a mesh data input and a mask. Well, if I hit 1 on the keyboard to expand all of my input channels here, you can see that really what this guy takes is several of these kind of baked maps. That's why we call it mesh data. So we have AO, curvature, position, world space. What I'm going to do in this case is just feed in ambient occlusion and curvature. So we need to generate these masks. Well, we actually already have the ambient occlusion, so that's good. We'll just plug that straight into the dirt, and that's coming from our material blend here. Now we need to create curvature, and we can do that. So what I'm going to do here is just grab this curvature smooth, and let's grab our normal and just plug that in. And so here's our curvature. I think what I'll do is just run a levels on this. just to kind of pre-process some of these ranges a bit. So I'm just making a slight adjustment here to this guy. All right, let's try something more like this. And then we'll plug this here into our curvature here. Okay, so now I'll just hit 3 on the keyboard just to clean up all of my channels. And then we'll take the output of this dirt, so you can see what this is generating for us already. This is, we call it a mask generator, and its whole purpose is just to generate a mask. So before we actually plug this in, you can see that if I start to change these instance parameters, like for instance the dirt level, I can decrease the dirt level. Notice that the dirt is really collecting in all of these kind of cavity areas, which is cool. I can also just increase this grunge amount. Here I have a dirt contrast. I can bring this down. So this is going to produce a pretty cool mask for us to use in this blending. So now let's take the result of this dirt, and we'll just plug that right here into the grayscale mask. And then we're going to right-click, drag and drop this right here onto our 3D view. Now we need to go through the process of just making some tweaks to have this give us the effect that we want. So first thing I'm going to do, come over here into my material blend, hit 1 on the keyboard. I'm just going to take a look at my channels. So base color is going to be okay. Normal is going to be okay. I want to make sure that this normal, well actually here, let's double check it and see. So here's the normal. I think it's actually affecting my normal channel, which I don't want. So I'm going to drop the opacity down to 0. Now, right off the bat, you can see that this is already starting to look a bit better. So we want to make sure that the dirt's not really affecting our normal. Okay, so let's look at our roughness. We do want this to affect our roughness, but here on this blend, of course, you could see that we have full control to change this. We also have blending modes and things that we could use as well. Roughness is good. Metallic. This one is important. We want to make sure that the opacity is set to 1. So for example, we now have this dirt layer that's kind of covering some of these nails. If we were to set this all the way here at 0, basically telling the shader that, okay, this is a full metal, but if we go back and look at our base color, you can see that that dirt is lowering our metal reflectance value. So this would be physically incorrect. So here we want to make sure that this is affecting the metal map either fully. So here you can see on our metal map, we now have these nice transitional gray areas. Or if we want to kind of help maybe punch this effect a little bit, what we could do is just kind of, lower the metal just a little bit, almost giving the effect of, well, some of this dirt, it's like a real thin layer, so most of the metal's kind of shining through and so on. So maybe I'll cheat it a little bit and just lower it, something like this. Our ambient occlusion is going to give us a little bit of a problem here with this. So I'm going to show you how we can fix that here in just a minute, but I also want to make sure my height's okay. So here we have our height. We definitely don't want this dirt to affect our height, so I'm going to set the opacity down here to 0. Okay, so now I know that this is all correct, but like I said, we do have that issue with our ambient occlusion. So let's go back and take a look at that again. So here you can see with our ambient occlusion, what's happening here is our dirt is affecting the ambient occlusion. So we could set this to 0, and it's basically going to give us the ambient occlusion from our base layer, our material 1 that we're blending, which is coming from our wood. Now, the way that I typically work is to just feed in a specific ambient occlusion here to this base material. And we're actually going to use this dirt mask to help us do that. We're going to use this as the ambient occlusion for the dirt. So here in our base material, what I'm going to do is just come over here to the user-defined maps, and I'm going to enable my ambient occlusion. Then we'll come back here to this dirt, and we're just going to plug this in. So now, if we take a look at this base material, it's going to be outputting this here as our ambient occlusion. Okay, so now, if we go back here to our base material, and just make sure that I'm viewing that here in my 3D view, let's expand our channel. So I'm just, again, tapping 1 on the keyboard. And let's go back here to our ambient occlusion. So as I said just a moment ago, we had just gone ahead and set the AO to 0, opacity 0, which means it was just being fed in from the wood's ambient occlusion as the input. However, now the dirt has its own ambient occlusion. So we can start to blend these two guys together. So here I'll start to just increase this opacity value here underneath my ambient occlusion, and now you can see that they're starting to blend. However, what I want to do is actually change the blending mode, and in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this to subtract. So now this is the new ambient occlusion that's being created for us that is taking into consideration here, if we look at it, the ambient occlusion that we created using our dirt mask generator, as well as the ambient occlusion from the wood material. And so here's our new result, and then we can just kind of, feather this back a bit by just lowering the opacity. So like I said, this is going to be the way I typically approach working with ambient occlusion when I'm using these base materials. So now we'll just hit 3 on the keyboard here, and this is now going to become our dirt. So we'll select this node, and let me just place a frame on this, and then here in the frame, we'll just call this dirt. So what I can do now is maybe come into here and let's add a gradient map. And let me just do a quick search in here for some grunge. And we'll try grunge map 13. So here, let's try something like this. We'll plug this guy into here. So here, what I'm going to do is just use my pick gradient and then just sample some dirt values that I found online. So maybe we'll try something like this. And then here in our base color, we can enable our base color input, and then we'll plug this in. So now this looks a lot better. This is more varied and things like that. Instead of just using a uniform color value, now we're using a mix between different dirt values to get something that's more organic and varied. Again, like I said, throughout the whole series, variation is always key when you're working to build procedural materials. Now we can go back and just kind of tweak what this grunge map is producing here so that we can get, again, more varied results and so on. So I think what I'll do is I'll drop this contrast down, we'll do something like this. And this is already looking a bit better. All right, so here that is our dirt. And like I said, I like to work this way because I can use the base material to kind of set up everything pretty quickly. I can get, make sure that everything's working right on the material blend. And then after that, I can go in and start to adding more finesse to color variation and so on. And here it always comes back to the process of a lot of tweaking. So here I might come back to this base color and maybe just drop the opacity amount here. So that just gives it more of kind of a thinner kind of dirt layer. I think that's going to work a little better as well. So now I'm just going to experiment just further refining this dirt. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a tile sampler. And I'm going to make an input pattern here. So let's start with just creating a shape node. So we'll create a shape node. And for the pattern type, I'm going to set this to paraboloid. Maybe just decrease the scale a little bit. All right, so now we'll add a purlin noise, and I will also create here a warp. So what I'm going to do here is just create like a little pebble, and then I'm going to use the tile sampler to basically kind of replicate that in different ways. So here we'll put in our paraboloid here as the input, and we'll use our purlin as the gradient. And here for this purlin, we're going to decrease the scale quite a bit. And then let's run the levels right after this warp here. So we'll come in and we'll just take the gray, our gamma here, and just kind of push this towards the black. And so we can get something like this. Here, let's actually just crunch this guy down a bit. So this is just a kind of a fast way to make like a pebble here. So we can do something like this. And then here we can go back and just play around with the scale if we want to. So maybe just something, I don't know, maybe like that'll be fine. All right, so yeah, this is just going to be like a small little pebble here for now. Let's take all this stuff, all these nodes, and we'll just move them up here for now. And this is going to be our pattern. So we'll plug this here into our pattern input for our sampler. And then here in the pattern, let's switch this to pattern input. Now, another thing we can do with this, and I guess I probably won't do it here in this video just to save time, but we also have the ability to increase these pattern inputs. So this gives us more and more of these inputs. So here, this could be like one variation of a pebble. Then we could, create some different variations of these nodes. Again, so we have different pebbles that we're basically scattering or replicating here in this tile sampler. And again, that gives you even more variation options. But like I said, I don't think we're really going to do that in this case. So now what we'll do is we'll just scroll down here to where we have our position, and let's do just a random position here. Let's see, maybe I'll increase the scale for now, scale random here. And let's also come in here and just do a random rotation. Kind of hard to see because it's basically round, but that's okay. You can see here with the tile sampler that the blending mode is set to max by default, and that's going to be pretty good. Okay, so This just gives us some basic pebble scatter here. Let's also just really increase this amount a lot. So maybe we'll try like, I don't know. Here, let's take it up to like, say, 80 by 80. So we'll do something like this. Now, I'm using the tile sampler because I have these nice inputs here, like a scale map input or rotation, and this guy here, which is a mask map. This allows me to vary specific certain parameters like scale, displacement, rotation, and so on based on an input map, and that's pretty powerful. In our case here, we're going to use this mask map input. And so I'm kind of thinking about trying something here with this dirt. So let me first come into here and grab a blur. So let's do just a slight blur on this, just to get rid of some of that noise. So we can try this, and let's see if we can't use this as our mask map input. So here, we'll just bring this guy all the way up here. And what we're going to do is, like I said, plug this here into our mask map input. So I'll double click, and just to view what we have so far in our tile sampler, well, we see nothing, and that's because we need to basically activate this mask map. So I'm going to scroll all the way down here into the color section, and then you have this mask map threshold. Now, as I start to increase this, you'll see that we're basically masking out a lot of these pebbles, and it's doing that based on whatever this input mask is feeding into the mask map input. So here you can see, we're starting to get some of this kind of collecting here in some of these gaps between our planks and so on. Let me just play around here with this blur again. So maybe we'll do something like this. Here, another thing I might do, let's try just running a levels on this as well. So we'll do something like maybe like this. Here, let me just kind of redistribute these nodes here. So let me do the levels first, and then we'll blur it. Okay. So now we'll play around with these values here. And increase that blur just a little bit. Okay, let's see what that's doing. All right, so now you see that we're starting to, you can see where it's starting to collect a lot of these, well, this little dirt pebbles here, and a lot of it's collecting in, the gaps between the planks and so on. So what I'll do here in this case, let's bump this guy up to maybe like, say, 120 by 120. Whoops. Okay, so now we're getting even more kind of fine collection into here. And let's go into our scale and maybe just up the scale on this a little bit more. I don't know. We'll play with this once we actually start to integrate this down into here. Okay, so now you can see more of an outline of what this, more of an outline that we're using here for our mask map. Okay, so now we have this in place, and what I'm kind of thinking about doing with this is then creating some normal information out of this. So I'll create a normal node, maybe set this to be like a value of 4 to start. And then here's our dirt. So right now, just so I can kind of see what's happening, I'm going to right click on my dirt, or excuse me, the dirt base material, and drag and drop that here into our 3D view so we can see it. Not a great example because right now, like I said, we have all this ambient occlusion here, but maybe this will kind of help us see this. So we'll come in and we'll enable our normal, and then let's just grab this normal and plug it into here. Okay, so now if I look, I'm starting to see, some of this normal information into here. Okay, so that's kind of working, I think. We'll see where this takes us. Let's also play around a bit with this ambient occlusion that's coming into here. So one thing I'm going to do is just blend. Let's grab, well, I'll tell you what, one of the things we're going to do first is we're going to come into here. We're going to scroll down. This is our tile sampler. We're going to scroll all the way down here towards the bottom where we have our color random, and I'm just going to set this value up a bit, maybe 0.5, and you can see what it does is just kind of it randomizes the luminance here, gives us some variation. So let's take this, and we're going to blend that, our tile sampler. Let's grab our ambient occlusion. So here, just to borrow the connection, I'm holding down the control key, left mouse button, and we'll plug that here into the background. And let's try doing, I guess, a max lighten into this. Well, here, let's see. Just try a couple different blending operations here. Yeah, maybe I'll try just doing a subtraction in there. Okay. So now, let's take that and pull it into our ambient occlusion. We might change that a bit. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to lessen that effect a little bit. So I'm just dropping the opacity. I'm just kind of making this up as I go. So again, this is kind of the fun part, just playing around with a little experiment here. We'll see how this goes. All right, so we have this normal information. Okay, so now this is our base material here. Let's right click and drag and drop this guy here into our 3D view. Now, we don't see anything because so far really all we've done, well, we've placed a little bit of this information into our ambient occlusion. Here, let's see if we see this at all. Yeah, not really. We're kind of losing it. Here, I'll tell you what. Let's go back to this guy. Let's set this up there. It's starting to show up a little bit in here like this. So let's do that. Let's keep that all the way up at 1. So now I'm starting to see some of these little pebbles creep into here. So that's okay. Now the other part of this is, we're not seeing anything because we didn't, a lot of this is coming in through our normal. And as earlier in this video, we set the normal to a value of 0. So what I'm going to do now is just start to give this a little bit of value here. So now what we want to do is just add some of this here into the opacity here for this normal. And so now if we kind of zoom out a little bit and kind of move our light around, we're starting to see where some of these little dirt pebbles here are starting to kind of collect in these areas. Here you can see it right here in this kind of crack and so on. So let's go back here to maybe this normal, and maybe we'll set this to a value of 8. And let's go back into this guy and maybe just increase the amount that we have here for this. There we go. So all we're really trying to do is just get a little bit of breakup in here like this. Just a couple of these little pebbles in here. If I just move my light over so we can really see some of the, where this is starting to collect. Now this is kind of what I'm trying to get into here. This is kind of working for me now. So now we'll pull this back, and there we go. All right, so it is starting to kind of, I guess, obliterate some of my normal. So let me try to take this back kind of the opposite way a little bit more. So I kind of want to do that. And there we go. That might be a nice balance. So we can try that. And one other thing I think I want to try to do is maybe try to integrate a little bit of color of this variation here into the color map that we have. So let's play around with that. Let's create a gradient map. And let's take our tile sampler and we'll pull this into here. So now we've just converted that from grayscale to color, which now allows us to do some blending here. So we'll take our gradient map and we're going to blend the foreground and background on this. And then here we'll just set this to max lighten. And so, okay, this is way too intense. Let's try a couple different blending modes. Maybe screen. Oh, here, let's try overlay. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, I think just max lighten. And then we're just going to drop the opacity quite a bit. So here I'm just going to try to slowly drive it up. So now we're just getting a little bit of variation here in our base color for these stones as well. And now let's take this and plug that into our base color. And that just kind of lightened up some of these little pebbles here. And so here we go. Now we kind of have that little extra effect in play in our material. All right, so the more I look at this normal opacity here, I can see that it's, this dirt mass that's coming in, it's kind of obliterating too much of that wood normal. So I'm going to do something similar to how I handled the ambient occlusion, and that's to feed in kind of a composited normal effect coming into this base material for my dirt. So what I'm going to do here is just grab a normal combine. And we're going to take the normal here, which is just going to be the little dirt pebbles for now. And then we're going to come back to that base material, which is just the normal for the wood. And we're going to plug this here into normal 1. And so now we have this combine. And then what we're going to do is take this and just replace the normal altogether with just this combined normal here coming into this base material. So now if I come back to this material blend, if we look at the normal here, I can now take, well here, if you look at this, if we go to 0, you can see that this is at 0%, it's going to be showing us the normal coming in, which if I double click the normal input for material 1, that's just the wood. Notice that its value range is not going to change at all once I start to add the opacity in. So now as I start to add this opacity in here, for this normal, you're going to see that what we have, whoops, here, let me just view that normal. So here it is at 0. And then as I start to add this in, the stone, the little dirt pebbles, you can see that it's no longer, it's basically kind of separated now from the normal of the wood material that we had underneath of that. So now this lets me have a nice little single controller here for basically the intensity value of kind of those little dirt pebbles, and yet still have the wood from the normals from the wood material retain all of the data value that I want from that as well. So now I'll come in and I'll hit 3 on the keyboard here. And so now we'll just kind of clean up what we have. So we have a lot of extra nodes here that are making up what our dirt material is going to be here. So let's make sure we get this organized. So I'm just going to move these nodes here. Let's see, this one is our base material. Yep, so we want that guy to go into here. This is that normal combine. That's where we did our ambient occlusion. And again, here we'll just move everything up, and then we'll expand this here just to encompass kind of what we had going on here with those little stone shapes that we made, or excuse me, little dirt pebble shapes. All right, and there we go. So this, again, this is all the nodes that make up that dirt. And then as you can see here in this material blending phase, this is our final material blend. So now let's just move this dirt over into this section. Again, I am just trying to clean this up. Let's get everything organized. Okay. Bring this guy down into here. All right, so like I said, this is going to cover all of our material blending that we've been doing. So here we have another section here for material blending. Let's grab this frame and bring it over. So we'll bring this guy up to here. And so now that I've finished all of the material blending, so we have our base wood, we have our nails, here we have a dirt material, and everything is blending here to this final material blend node here. Now what I can do is create my outputs, and I can do that pretty quickly by just right-clicking here, and then I can choose to come over to create and choose output nodes. Now, this is going to ask to create nodes for hidden connectors, and what that's talking about is the other channels that we had turned off in some of our material blends, like specular, gloss, and all that. And so we don't want any of that. We just want the ones that are active, or the outputs that are going to be active. So for these hidden connectors, I'll just say no. And then here, it automatically creates all of my outputs for me. So we'll move these guys over here. And then finally, here's a little output frame. And we'll come into here, and we will frame this guy up like this. So now we have our outputs. And here, we get to the end of the entire process. We started here, just like I said, a quick kind of recap. We started here with our basic shape. We moved through to create large medium shapes. Here's where we get this. Then we start to add small details. Here, all of this is going to come together to create this overall, pretty detailed height map. From that, we can extrapolate our maps, such as our normal, ambient occlusion, roughness, and so on. Here is where we went into the process of colorizing that height data to get our color map. And then all of that gets placed down into this single material. So everything was all then compiled down to the single base material node. Then we go into the material blending phase. So here we had our wood. Then we had a nails. Here we have a dirt. And then finally, all of this comes together in the material blend to create here our full complex material. And then we have our outputs here at the very end. So now our procedural substance is complete.